Hi, Misha here, and quite recently we were doing a 45 ACP day, so brought these two guns out, the Marines M45A1 and SOCOM's Mark 23 Motto, MK.25 Motto, the HK. You can check out those videos. In doing that, the last range trip, Fox said, hey, pack a couple of 9mm. And haven't had either of these out in a while. So through the Beretta M9A1 and the Sig Sauer Mark 25, aka the P226 Navy, in there. Kind of completing the modern last generation handgun, if that makes sense. And that's really the purpose. These are the last of a dying breed in the U.S. military. Metal framed and hammer fired, double single action. And both were actually purchased in relatively small numbers by relatively small units. The Marines, mainly the Expeditionary Force and others, reconnaissance, and the Navy SEALs. Also, as it happened, since these were packed with us, one of these ended up getting featured in an upcoming video, and by that I mean a news video. For more on that, you can go check our Patreon out, where we've been talking a bit about it, kind of teasing it, and we can make an announcement on this channel here publicly in a little while. But for now, we thought we would dive into the history, what makes these different from their predecessors, maybe how they're still better than newer guns with the plastic frames and striker fired, and maybe the shortcomings, and of course, give our impressions of shooting them both. With that, we'll just dive right on in. Of course, as always, if you could, please like, share, subscribe. And again, there's that Patreon. Check it out if interested. M9A1. Since it was introduced and adopted first, let's talk about the M9A1. And to do that, I brought out my original M9 here. I'm not going to go much into the trials, except to say that work began in the late 70s. The first round of trials were in 80-81, and the Beretta did very well. Second round of trials, it had more competition from the Sig design, but ultimately won out for both reliability and cost. Of course, it was officially adopted in 1985, but it would take a number of years to re-equip the entire military, phasing out the old 1911, but also many, many other handguns that were in inventory, mostly in small numbers, but still there. I mean, there were over 2 dozen. The original gun here is pretty much a product of its time. It's all metal for the most part. No rail. Traditional sights. Has this very nice brunette finish. Chrome line barrel, something the military always requires. Lanyard loop, plastic grips. Checkering back here. Not much, not checkering, but, strapping here, ridging. Yeah, that's the M9 for you. Of course, it uses kind of a modified Walther P38 system, falling wedge system. We'll open them up in a minute. Recoil guide here. There's some benefits to it. This barrel never actually moves out of alignment in the vertical, only in the horizontal. We have this very open top slide, which means ejection is very positive. I mean, it's almost impossible for a cartridge to get stuck in there under normal situations. Of course, we have an external release and safety decocker on the slide. Double action, single action trigger system. I can do it here. Hold on, see? You know the deal. It's a Beretta. It's a very standard 109 for the 80s. But as the war on terror kicked up, a number of things happened. For one, around 2002, 2003, the idea was to go to the JCP. The program was for a Joint Combat Pistol. This was meant to be in 45 again. Now, you can't blame the Beretta for being in 9x19. That was actually specified by the XM9 trials. So Beretta was only delivering, as were everyone else who put it in there, what was ordered. But the thought was to go back to that. And the requirements were there, but it drug out. There was a lot of bickering between the Army, the Air Force. The Navy was kind of pitching in occasionally. And the Marines were losing patience by 2005, 2006. And eventually the JCP pretty much just died and turned briefly into the combat pistol program and then just died altogether. But the Marines lost patience and ended up adopting, at least in some numbers, the M9A1, a recent edition that Beretta had put out. Originally they ordered 3,500 towards the beginning of 2006, but by the end of the year, after it was clear the JCP was going nowhere, originally it was just thought this could be an interim pistol, they upped that to around 7,500, and they would purchase at least 500 more 2 years later in 2009. After that, the numbers get a little sketch. It's very clear that Beretta was shipping both M9 and M9A1s, and it seems like really only the Marines were purchasing the A1, whereas the other branches were just sticking with the traditional M9. So, let's run a few rounds through it, and then compare and contrast it to the original, see if the upgrades were worth it. Yeah, Fox with the M9A1. Alrighty. Always a fun gun. The biggest difference and improvement you'll see, it's the rail under the barrel here on the dust cover. Standard 1913 compatible. There's only one slot, plus the one in the middle. But for a weapons light, that's really kind of all you need, or laser. The trigger guard was also reshaped a bit. The checkering, or ridging I should say, on the front was done away with, and it was kind of flattened out a bit so that more accessories could fit there. It retains a corrosion resistant finish. All the controls are the same. The grip did change a bit. In the front you have true checkering, so they added horizontal cross hatching, and in the back the same too, vertical and. They also relieved the top of the strap here just a bit, kind of beveling it in. That just gives a better purchase, especially for somewhat smaller hands. I certainly appreciate it. And they went to a new magazine. I briefly looked for my original 80s, 90s mags, couldn't find them. This Airtronic, a contract mag, was in it. There's also was Checkmates. Either way, pretty standard body. The Beretta factory mags had the thicker floor plate, but it was still pretty much all metal. Kind of a phosphated type corrosion resistant finish. The new mags were different. The metal floor plate went to polymer. And they added this ridge on the side of the mag. It's kind of a sand cut, because when we were fighting combat in the sand. They also gave it this new PVD finish, which is corrosion resistance, but it also doesn't gum up, grind up in dust, sand, doesn't attract. Because with phosphating, because it's kind of a finish that retains oil and grease, that can attract sand and dust and cause your mag to jam. Another thing they did in the gun itself, if you look at the mag well here, it's very straight cut. They beveled the mag well. Not only would this make for easier insertion, very true, it also meant if there was some sand and dust on your mag, that could maybe funnel it off the sides and down. It at least gave it a fighting chance to work. So pretty small but important changes there. They had been having a lot of mag troubles. Can't really blame Beretta for that because they weren't using Beretta mags. The Beretta mags seemed to work fine. By the way, 15 rounds was the standard capacity. 13 was required by the XM9 trials, so it was a couple more than required. But when they started going to Checkmate and Airtronic and some of the other subcontractors, that's when the problems really started. They should have all been mil-spec, but hey. Now, something that people often credit to the M9A1 are the polymer small parts, but this is not true. Most obvious is the guide rod. This is round metal. You go over to here, we have fluted polymer. We also go to polymer mag catch. A polymer safety, at least on the left side. I don't think the right is. Could be wrong on that. Also quite noticeable, a polymer trigger versus metal. And even they went from a metal lanyard to a polymer one. Okay, first off, I want to say that there's actually still metal in the trigger. It's not just straight polymer. It has a metal core. It's just a polymer outer coating. Safety is the same way. Now the guide rod is all polymer. This was actually not introduced with the M9A1. It was introduced with the standard M9 in the early 21st century. I bought one of the, what would have been the 20th anniversary M9s, and that was around 2004, 2005, and it had the polymer parts. So that was a standard feature for all Berettas made in this century, basically. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Metal bends, it can corrode, even with good finish. Polymer, if it bends, it flexes back, or it just snaps, or at the very least cracks, and you can easily see it. It also isn't as likely to freeze up, grind up. Again, it doesn't require oil like, metal would in the desert. Plus, it is maybe cheaper and lighter by just a hair. So all in all, it's an improvement. It really is. And if you think about the fact that Glocks are so popular and other polymer frame guns, if you trust your frame to be made from polymer, why would you not trust things like a guide rod or a trigger, which again is metal coated anyway? I just wanted to point that out. Of course, the follower in the mag is polymer as well. So yeah, it's an updated version, namely with a better grip and a rail. I also on mine have the true mil-spec laser grip panels. Found these at a store for a really good price, lightly used, put them on. They got to complete the package, and they don't make it a whole lot fatter side to side. So, that's the M9A1. What about the Sig? Mark 25. Yeah, red one. I must confess a failing to you. I don't actually have an 80s or even 90s Sig P226. Sorry. So this one I'll have to do. This is actually a 220 Swiss P75. It's the original single stack. Now, as I said, the original round of trials that lasted till 81, Beretta clearly won. But in 83, 84, that round of trials, Sig submitted an updated version of this design, which it had recently started producing with Sig Sauer in West Germany for the trials, meeting specifications. As I said, 13 rounds was the minimum. They gave their pistol a 15-round double-stack mag, They went to more of an American style mag release and just generally changed the control shapes a bit. This would of course become the Sig P226, and it passed the trials for durability, reliability, just like the Beretta, but lost out because of cost. Some people have other ideas, but whatever. But it would go onto the market and become very successful in the mid-80s, first kind of being seen around 86, 87, and going from there. Some in the military, the Marines and the Navy, especially the Navy SEALs in particular, weren't happy with the M9 selection, though. There would actually be another round of trials, which would result in the compact version, the P228, being adopted as the M11, though. So that's kind of neat for the SIG. And so we move forward. Now, the Navy SEALs, who pretty much can own whatever they want, would purchase basically commercial P226s throughout the late 80s and early 90s, issuing them as they were. But the big deal was actually this big gun here, the HK Mark.23. This program began in the early 90s and was adopted around 1995-96. Unfortunately, it didn't shake out to be exactly what they had hoped for. We just recently did a update video on this. You can check it out. This offensive pistol, when they laid out the requirements, it seemed cool, but when they actually got it in hand and passed it on to the operators, reactions were mixed, to say the least. So, yeah. They were, frankly, kind of disappointed by it by the late 90s. Since that was the Mark 23, that gave room for the Mark 24, which was the first militarized version purchased by the U.S. Navy SEALs. Essentially, it was like this pistol / this pistol, but it had markings specific. It had a new anti-corrosion finish to the slide, had a chrome line bore, and it had a proprietary rail under the barrel, as did the Mark 23. Late 90s was still kind of the time for proprietary rails and what have yous. A few little things. It also had a new slide, very new at the time. The original Sig Sauer slide is rolled sheet steel with a second piece back here that's a breech block. This breech block is held in with roll pins. And over time, those roll pins with recoil, especially with plus PMO, deform. So they need replacing every 5, 6, 7,000 rounds, whatever, depending on use. Well, as Sig Sauer up in New Hampshire really started working, they developed a new single-piece stainless steel slide. So it's actually a forged slide, a machined slide, with the breech block as part of it, meaning you kind of avoid that. You also go to just a stronger, more corrosion-resistant slide. So, huzzah. This would be adopted by the Navy SEALs as the Mark 24. Now, this is not that, but they're very similar, but that had a proprietary rail. It also had standard sights, like the 226. So, enough John. Let's go back to the range. And now Fox with the Mark 25. So some might wonder, well, the Mark 24 being the SIG, I heard of another Mark 24. That would be the Mark 24 Mod O, which was kind of the, not replacement, but second generation of this. That was the HK.25. I believe most were the HK.45 CT. Now, we did do a video on that gun a long time ago. Probably should do it again. But for now, you get it. So the Mark 24 Mod O was in 45, and it was a smaller version of this, but still made by HK, essentially. I know it's a different gun, but just wanted to address that. For years, the Navy SEALs would purchase the 9mm Sig Mark 24 in small but growing numbers, up until around 2010, when they really needed something updated for modern times. After all, they couldn't have something that wasn't as cool as what the Marines had. Thus, in 2011, they adopted the Mark 25 here. The major improvement, we have a true 1913 Picatinny rail. This actually has 3 slots. Again, they had to one-up the Beretta M9A1. It also has SIG's night sights. These are the big differences. It has this nitron-coated stainless steel slide. Still has the alloy frame. And unlike the Beretta, aside from the grip panels, this is still all metal, alloy or steel, including a metal head rod, mag catch, decocker, slide release, trigger, all metal. But what they did do, they did give these a very aggressive phosphate anti-corrosion finish. Wraparound grip panels, lanyard bar in the back, 15 round mag, no sand cut, and this is still more phosphated, not PVD. These are made in the US. But then again, the M9A1 was meant more for desert, arid environments. This was meant more for wet operations. So kind of 2 different requirements. This is also just frankly a more kind of conservative traditional pistol design, whereas the M9A1 went to a little bit more modern styling in some ways. But both guns are very, very similar because they were both designed essentially for the XM9 trials, at least these versions. So they would purchase these in limited numbers starting in 2011, and this would technically be the 3rd generation of the P226 in the U.S. Navy SEALs. I don't know if any other divisions, branches really use this. Doesn't seem to be. So I'd also say that the barcode system was in full swing by this time on these pistols. Something that people kind of don't like on certain new Colts as well, but that's just kind of modern military for you, barcodes. Of course, this had a reshaped trigger guard from the original a bit to work with the pick rail as well. So there you have it. With that, how do they compare? The M9A1 and the Mark 25. Let's begin our comparison with the technical, the objective facts. Both basically weigh the same. I think the Beretta might be like a ½ ounce lighter, but they're both around 33 ounces, give or take accessories. So 2 pounds unloaded, maybe slightly more. Both are double single action, both fire 9x19, both use a very, very similar 15 round magazine, both are built for military specifications, both have a rail, and both have a safety of sorts. The Beretta here has a slide-mounted safety decocker, and the Sig, well, there's no safety, it's just a decocker, and it kind of relies on the double-action pull. Both, of course, have an exposed hammer. Technically speaking, the only real difference, the Sig has about a 4.4-inch barrel, and the Beretta has a 4.9, so ½ inch longer, but the overall length is only slightly more with the Beretta because of the way the grip sweeps back more on the Sig and the Tang. And, height, of course, there's a little bit more bore axis going on with the Sig compared with the Beretta. But internally, these are 2 totally different operating systems. Because their military guns both come apart very easily. For this Sig, just pull the slide back and then rotate the lever down. For the Beretta, similar, but to rotate the lever, there's a button to push on the right side, meaning it's in theory, more secure. You can tell this was more designed for general issue, and this is just an updated version. Whereas this is between the somewhat easier takedown and lack of external safety as more of a special forces. Here are the two mags. The Beretta is slightly taller. Not just the base plate either, but the body. But yeah. Both have notches on both sides for swapping the catch around. Both have aluminum alloy frames. So the frames are very light. The Sig has a wraparound grip, still two-piece. And then just a horizontally ribbed front. It does not have a beveled magwell. The Beretta we've already talked about. It has a exposed back strap and a beveled magwell. But the real difference is with the slides here. Very different operating system. The Sig is a modified linkless Browning tipping or tilting barrel. The Beretta, well, it's a modified, updated version of what Walther first used on the P38 and continued to use through the P5, and Beretta started using with their model 1951. Still has a recoil spring down below, though. Taking them fully apart, like I said, this is now the newer single piece slide, addressing the earlier concerns with the original. This is the classic Beretta open top slide, something they first tried out way back in World War I. Of course, it's a very different slide today, but goes to show you. The Sig has a metal guide rod with a braided spring. Sig likes their braided springs. And the Beretta, polymer rod with a more traditional spring. Here's our barrels. Really showing you the linkless system on the Sig here. Note that it's a phosphated barrel, whereas the Beretta has more of that Bruniten type finish they do. It's a slicker, smoother finish, but still very good at corrosion resistance. Both have chrome line bores. The internals on the Sig are phosphated as well. Of course, this is the wedge system. This is that the Walther inspired. The benefit to this is the barrel never tips up and down. It only moves front and back, which in theory is better for repeat accuracy. It also gives a lower bore axis and changes up the recoil impulse a bit. Camming system. The downside is this is considered a replacement part. These blocks can crack or wear out over time. And it's not a big deal. Almost every gun has wear parts. If absolutely nothing else, it's always going to be the magazine and eventually the barrel itself. Where they ran into problems early on, they fixed them with better heat treat and everything else. And later on, sometimes they would use non-Beretta replacement parts, subcontracted parts, much like with the mags. And so that could have been a potential issue. Keep in mind, too, in the U.S. military, there were only a few thousand Sig 226 types, and a few more 228 M11s. Beretta estimated they would ship up to 1 million M9 types. So, yeah, the chances of that are just more. Frankly, I like the system, and having an armor replace a simple block that didn't require tools every, 5,000-10,000 rounds. Yeah. But that's getting more into opinion. So with that, let's put these back together, and I'll share what Fox and I thought. J-Row with the M9A1. To begin, these are both my guns. No interest in selling either one. Both are damn fine handguns. But Fox slightly preferred the Mark 25, and I slightly prefer the M9A1. Few reasons for that. Some are subjective, and some need more time. So we both agreed we would bring these back out again in the spring when the weather's warmer, maybe with a few more 9mm to give more trigger time. I've fired both quite a bit, but more is always better, especially when you're using the exact same ammo type. So, what did Fox think? What he did like about the M9A1, he liked the grip. Fit his hand well, the overall size. He also, frankly, just likes the looks of it. It's a very good feeling pistol, very smooth. For a mass-produced issue gun, everything about it is very smooth. However, what he didn't like about the Beretta were the sights. Now, these are the newer 3-dot sights that are often on the newer M9s and M9A1s, and they are a little cramped to him, especially with the wider front. Of course, you can replace sights. Some might also criticize the slide-mounted safety. He didn't, but I know that's a common critique, so I did want to mention it. He's not sure if it's the sights or not, but he felt like he was more accurate with the 226, the Mark 25. He does like these Sig night sights, the picture they give. Slightly slimmer front sight and wider rear. But that could be a lot of things, and again, they're easy to replace out. Interesting, he actually finds this to be a snappier gun. More felt recoil over the Beretta. He finds this to be a smoother, less recoil gun. Yet at the same time, he said that he finds this to be easier to return the target for a second follow-up shot. Interesting combination, but that's what he said, so passing it along. And just in general, he finds the kind of feel of it to be more to his taste, his liking. Keep in mind, he's a very big Glock fan. In fact, he said in some ways it reminds him of, say, his Glock 21 or 19. I get that. So it could just be more familiarity, because this does have a very similar Browning barrel system to a Glock. So maybe the type of recoil, the way it shoots, the high bore axis doesn't really disrupt him. Whereas with this was a bit more of an alien gun to him. He's not really used to the P38 or the Beretta 92. But still did enjoy shooting it, and is actually quite interested to see if different sights would change his mind, or maybe just more time to get familiar with it. Just a couple more through the Sig. As for myself, I concur that the Beretta looks cooler. Hey, just because I'm blind doesn't mean I don't have preferences on how things look and feel. The Sig is a perfectly good-looking gun, but it's very blocky, square, very conventional. It looks like a lot of other handguns. Of course, it inspired a lot of them. The Beretta, even today, is unique in its operating system, and I really do like how the falling wedge, the recoil, feels on it. I also really enjoy how smooth the slide is. And I do like that it does have an optional actual safety as opposed to just a decocker. Not a big deal, but yeah. And even though this has a larger grip, it still somehow fits my hand really well. Maybe even better than the Sig. And it is, to my feeling, a smoother gun. And I really prefer the trigger The reset is a little bit shorter and crisper, to my feeling. Whereas the Sig, while it's perfectly fine, is a little bit springier. I don't want to say spongier, but springier and lighter. And again, we're splitting hairs. I'm 100% serious. But the reset's a little further forward. The Berettas get a little bit shorter of a reset. Trigger pull, weight, and double. The Sig is a lighter double pull, but the Beretta is more stagey and frankly smoother. So it's kind of whatever you want. Cocking the hammer. Easy on both. I'd say the Sig's a slightly shorter cock. I just said that, didn't I? Staying in. Both have very nice pulls. The Beretta's kind of breaks more like a glass rod. Nice, sharp. The Sig's very similar, maybe just slightly lighter, but also slightly less predictable. But again, splitting hairs. I will give the Sig credit too for having 3 rail slots versus 1, even if that's not so much a deal. And even though Fox was more accurate with the Sig, we have to point out that the Beretta does have a longer barrel, so the potential could be more there. It also has a very long sight radius. Not sure if it's longer than the Sigs or not, but it's quite good for what it is. And weight and all that's the same. Both are really neat. I will say for just the collecting purpose, since it's me, the Sig does win out. When they did this version, they did the barcode, they did the anchor, they did it Mark 25. Sig says this is exactly what they shipped to the Navy SEALs. It's an M9A1, but part of it is still marked 92A1, 92FSA1. So it's not quite as exact. Now, the previous M9 we looked at, that's Beretta's more commemorative edition early on. This is a little less. But then again, when I bought this was $550. And the best deal I could ever find on one of these was about $850. And today they're more than that. So the Beretta was cheaper. The Sig, though, does give you night sights. And I believe this came with 3 mags. And the Beretta came with 2. Both did come with their correct mags, though. So that's nice. And as I said earlier, really, as far as durability, dependability, one is meant more for water, swampy, humidity, and one is meant for more desert, dry, high altitude. So different things. But both are very environmentally protected for their things. So with that, where do these stand today? I said at the beginning of the video, they're kind of the last of a dying breed, last of a generation. Why is that? How did it get going? So let's wrap up with that section of the video. M.25A1. The Marines purchased the M9A1 in small but consistent quantities for a few years. But then in 2012, 2013, the M.25A1 came out. Now this was always meant to be a MARSOC pistol, kind of expeditionary, but there were big plans for it. Now, I'm not going to go into it here, but they didn't really work out. In fact, already by 2015, 2016, these were being phased out. The contract never really went the way they hoped, even though we really enjoy shooting this gun. So this would continue on past its first potential replacement, but not its second one, frankly. It's hard to stand up to the Glock. I just pulled out my 19X, but yeah. In 2015, some of the Navy and Marines were given the okay to carry Glock 19s, even some Glock 17s, switching away from a hammer-fired metal pistol frame to a striker-fired alloy pistol frame. still 9mm, what have you. That doesn't mean all the M9s and M9A1s were pulled out, far from it. It just means the Glock started to come in 2015, replacing in some units this. So that's kind of where that ended. What about the Mark 25? Mark 23 in the rain.
Beautiful.
Adopted first in 2011, these would be purchased in small numbers for a few years as well. The older Mark 23 mottos would remain in inventory, but who knows how much they were actually used. Same goes for the Mark 24 Mod 0, the MK.25 CT. The fact is that 45 was just falling out of favor most of the time. It still has its purpose, but when you're operating overseas with allies, they're firing 9mm, it makes sense. So, usually only useful if weight and size don't matter and you need to use suppressed. And you could definitely get this version with a threaded barrel. Sometimes I kind of wish I had, but oh well, I found a good deal on this one. But in 2015, the Glock came along as well. And so Navy SEALs started packing the Glock when mission called for it, could use it. And as corrosion resistant as this gun is made, when your frame is polymer and your slide has the Tenifer finish plus sometimes Cerakote or whatever on top of it you might want to do, that's pretty darn resistant itself. Plus you get the benefits of stratified. So, yeah, it kind of phased these out. Now, that's not to say all the Navy SEALs Mark 25s were taken away. I'm sure they're still in inventory. I'm sure some old-timers still pull them out, even some young new guys. But it became less and less common later on. But in a lot of ways, Sig would have the last laugh. M17? I'm talking, of course, about the M17, Sig P320. This is, of course, adopted in January of 2017 to replace as many pistols as it could. And the M18, the compact version, would do even more. Not going to get into it too much today, but Sig went up against Glock. That's where this 19X comes from. It was their entry, and it was a close run race, kind of like these were nearly 40 years prior. Sig and Beretta. Well, it ended up being Sig and Glock, and Sig won this time. And people go back and forth on this and that. Now, I will say Beretta didn't go out without a fight. They enjoyed that military contract. They proposed the M9A3, saying that instead of going to a whole new pistol, just upgrade your current Berettas. Good try, but I think the military was ready after all that JCP failed 10 years earlier, so yeah, now they're ready. I don't have an M9A3 here today to show you, but actually, towards the end of Jay's involvement with the channel, we were working on a video because he had picked up an M9A3, so I do have some shooting footage from that range trip. I don't think you've ever seen it before. Check it out. M9A3. Yep. M9A3.
Yeah, get what you're saying on that long reset.
What Jay was commenting on there was something I had said off camera, that I thought the M9A3 had a longer reset than previous versions. Not exactly a complaint, but an observation. Neat design, it really is. More suppressor friendly, slimmer, more versatile grip. You can really size it more. But in the end, it's not what the military went with. In fact, today we've even got the M9A4, but that was designed for the commercial and export markets. No, they're going with the M17. And you have to give credit. These guns, like I said, are over 2 pounds unloaded. Polymer guns like the Glock, even the Sig here, which is a little bit heavier than the Glock, they're about a half-pound lighter unloaded. So you're saving a lot of weight. One thing they did want was a manual safety. This does have the Sig night sights. So, yeah, something that Fox would enjoy. Of course, rail, it's a whole thing. And I have to admit, I do enjoy shooting my I've been saying Mark too much today, my M17. Striker fired, but with some traditional elements. And that means these are the last really hammer-fired guns purchased in numbers adopted by the military. So I think they're worth kind of giving a salute to. And they're still around. There's still plenty of Berettas, even some SIGs knocking about. But every year, Berettas wear out because they're reaching the end of their service lives, and they're being replaced by the M17. Although there are still some Glock 19s and even maybe some 17s in certain areas of the U.S. military. So not the discount Glock. So what do you think? Should they have stuck with the metal-framed hammer-fired guns? Or are they right to go to the striker-fired polymer-framed guns? Let me know in the comments. Frankly, let's be honest, in a military situation, the rifle, the carbine is exactly, you need one for sure, but the exact type, be it a HK416 or a Colt M4 or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Fires bullets. And if the rifle isn't of critical importance to winning a battle, the pistol sure as hell isn't. This is, most of the time, a backup gun. Once in a blue moon, you might have a pistol as your primary. That's the whole idea behind the Mark 23. But most of the time, it's just the backup piece. And both of these, all four of these, will do the job. It's one of those things you probably don't need it 99% of the time, but when you do need it, it needs to work and work on the first try, which is why corrosion resistance, durability, because guns get knocked about in military service, are so important. So while it's a necessary piece of kit, and an important one, yes, it is of second or third level importance because there's so many other things going on, i.e., any of these are good enough, frankly. But I also understand why the modern styling probably works better. It's lighter, more corrosion resistance, and yes, also more economical and versatile. M9A1 again.
Open.
All right, just a couple more through the Mark 25. That's all. So if we're being honest, the first attempt to replace the Beretta M9A1 and the Mark 24/25 were not successful. The M45A1 and the Mark 23, they did what they asked them to do, just they happened to ask the wrong questions, if we're being honest. But learning from experience, listening to feedback from the field, first Glocks were phased in, and then the M17, which does have quite a few neat features to make it more of an issue gun versus the Glock. The original Glock was never really well suited to the U.S. military. So, story for another day. We'll definitely do a U.S. handguns range trip when it's warmer. Sounds like a lot of fun, and actually other family members want to get involved too. So yeah, feel free to let us know what you think. Comment below, please. Check out the Patreon page, including for that news on this kind of becoming a, I don't want to say famous gun, but I picked a gun to be a go to war or survivalist type, and my reasons behind it, and for that matter, Fox's reasons for picking a Glock 19. On that, on behalf of Fox and J-Ro, this is Misha, and we'll all catch you very soon next time.